Thank you, everyone. Wow, a lot of people here. So, yeah, Chris said I'm not one of the angry people, but I'm asking you, are you serious? So, this is actually a rant. Sorry for that. So, I come from Essen, Germany. As Chris said, I'm with Nobility, and I'm 50% of my time goes to W3C as a fellow in the Education Outreach Working Group. What we are doing is basically giving you all a lot of great educational material so you can learn how to make websites accessible. This is me at the Beyond Tellerrand Play and Make 5 years ago where I spoke. This was pretty embarrassing for me. This presentation reflects my personal views. Just an important note, this presentation contains ARIA examples that are preventing websites and applications from being accessible. So don't copy and paste stuff from here. The slides, I will give you the URL at the end. So what is WAI-ARIA? WAI-ARIA is accessible rich internet applications. And rich internet applications has nothing to do with Bitcoin and all that fancy stuff to get rich. This is from W3C, it's a standard. And basically it was created to make web applications accessible. And when it started, it was to make the bridge, the rainbow bridge between HTML4 and the accessibility APIs. And that was quite some time ago. So probably something that you remember if you're as old as I am. And ARIA is not witchcraft. I just want to put that first. I will show a lot of stuff where it goes wrong. But it's not something where you have to make a lot to really grasp it. There is no ARIA make accessible true, so you can't just apply ARIA and everything will be fine and everyone can use your website. There are rules for ARIA. So you have to learn those rules for ARIA. And there are 5 rules. It's pretty easy. So the first rule is, if there is an HTML5 element or attribute that does what you want to do, then use it. Don't use ARIA for it. And that's interoperability. That's to make sure that you get the most out of your code. And the second rule is don't change the native semantics unless you really, really have to. And you think, what are native semantics anyway, and how would I change them? Well, this is the example. The top one is bad. It says it's an H1, so heading level 1, and it has the role button. What this does is actually creating a button that has the content heading button. This is not a heading anymore. So people navigating your site via headings can't find this anymore. So that's really bad. What you should do is have an H1 and a button element inside of it, and then it will work as you expected. That's pretty much what those 2 rules mean. A third rule, and there's an example by my colleague Nick Steenhout, who tweeted this. It's an H2 with a class H3, so that it looks like an H3. Then it has the role heading, which is redundant because we already have a heading. Then there's ARIA level 1, because it's actually not an H2, but a heading level 1. Don't do that ever. Don't copy that. Forget it right now. So the third rule is all interactive ARIA controls must be usable with the keyboard. So usable with the keyboard doesn't mean you have to use the A to Z keys and stuff like that. It actually means the keyboard is used as an API to the website. So you press the tab key and you move through the site interactive element by interactive element. And so if your interactive element is not accessible using the keyboard, it can't be found and you won't have any interaction with it and it's not an interactive element anymore. For example, if you got something with a role button, that would be an HTML button element. It has to work with the enter or return key, but also with the space key. So there are rules for that, how a button should work. So if you're creating a button for yourself using a div or a span, you have to make sure that it works. And that means more work for you. Use an HTML5 button, it's all included. The fourth rule is do not use role presentation or ARIA hidden true on a visible, focusable element. Because if you do that, a screen reader user, for example, goes to that element and it doesn't get announced. So if you got a button and you have ARIA hidden true on it, the screen reader can get to it, but actually there's radio silence because you are saying the screen reader, the accessibility API, this button is not here. Those are not the robots you're looking for. Accessibility, oh yeah, and that's the fifth rule. All interactive elements must have an accessible name. So if you got a button, it shouldn't be empty. You have to say what that button does. That's pretty easy, right? So ARIA is really well supported, but some aspects are not. Hayden Pickering, a good friend and colleague of mine, wrote this blog post, ARIA controls is poop. And basically that describes how screen readers don't really know what to do with this ARIA attribute. And so you should never use it unless you really know what you're doing. WAI-ARIA is really complicated, and that's ARIA 1.0, and it has this nice diagram showing what belongs to what and how the roles and the different attributes work together. So it's really, really complicated. And so that means it's also complicated for web developers implementing it. It's not something that you can just do. And ARIA can be like this. This is a ramp with a sign on it that says this is the accessible route, and it's very steep, and so yeah, you can do stuff like that where it's not really accessible, but you say this is the accessible one. Don't do that. Bad ARIA examples. This is something I've seen in real life. It is a link with the ID airline logo and href. That's fine. And then there's a class logo, and then there is an ARIA label airline name, which is, and the link is empty. There's an NBSP non-breaking space in there, which is, okay, this is accessible. It could be used by a screen reader, but it's actually really best practice. You don't want to have the ARIA label on there and nothing inside the link. Just use a link with an image in there instead of a background image, which was the first example, or use an SVG. And you can use that, and that will work fine as well. The other really bad thing that I've seen is this slide navigation. So if you got a slider, and basically they're using links with the roll button, because this is not really a link, it's a button. And then it has class attributes like nav inactive and nav active to show the active one, and a roll button. Oh, I already told about a roll button. And a JavaScript void 0, because that's best practice. And then they got hidden text with slide 1. Yes, you can do that, and it might work if you have your JavaScript right. But use a nav element to show this is a navigation area. Use a button. Use ARIA selected or ARIA pressed, false, and true to convey the state. And use ARIA labels or text or an image for the different slide names. So this is much easier to convey the meaning. This is also a nice thing that I've seen. It's a table heading with a tab index equals 0. Tab index equals 0 makes that you can tab to an element. And that sounds good, and they got roll button. So this is a button. Now it's not a table heading anymore, and it has the ARIA label sort column. So this table heading actually isn't for the name anymore. It says just sort column, and it is not a table heading. So when a screen reader is using your table, they don't get any information about the column or about the column they're in, because this is not a table header anymore. Don't do stuff like that. I mean, it's easy to do and easy to think that's the right approach, but it isn't. So, and people do that all the time, especially with buttons. I mean, this is one of the most extreme examples. It's a button type button, roll button, ARIA required false, because, yeah, required buttons are a thing now. Tab index equals 0. A button is already tappable. You don't need to use tab index equals 0. We don't need stuff like that. Just use a button, type button, and that's what you need. This is another nice one. Someone put an image, an icon on their page, and they used like a background image here as well. And basically they said, this is a role image, which, yes, sounds about right. And then they basically said, oh yeah, and this is ARIA hidden true. You don't have to put ARIA hidden true on something that, you don't need to put a role image on something that you hide anyway. Because if you don't want to convey semantics, you can just leave it off, and an empty span would be okay, depending on what the icon looks like. If it's in a button, and it's the only thing in a button, you want to have alternative text there. And it's not harmful, but what's the point, you know? Really, really bad is this example. It's a body with an ARIA hidden true. This hides everything in your body. Now, this is from, I think Angular did that when you have had a dialog in your code. It opened the dialog and put an ARIA hidden true on the body. Now, the problem is the dialog is inside the body, so the dialog was hidden as well. And you can't undo ARIA hidden true. You can't go in and say, everything is hidden but this. That doesn't work. So don't do that. Never do that. Forget this right now. I want to give you something that you can take with you and give your developers, and that's the WAI-ARIA Authoring Practices Guide from W3C. It's a very long, very complicated document because ARIA is complicated. But actually, if you follow it and follow all the keyboard interaction patterns in it, you can make your stuff accessible if you're using ARIA. I would recommend to just use HTML5 as much as you can, because it really gets weird. And then there is using ARIA in HTML5, another document by W3C, which has all the rules on the top, and then you got semantic stuff, and they go inside how HTML and ARIA work together to be really seamlessly. And I haven't looked at the time, so I don't know how long I have, but I'm already through. Just a few conclusions. Use ARIA Landmarks. They are great if you have a heading element, header element. If you got a main element, use those. States and properties, things like ARIA pressed true, ARIA selected, they are awesome. ARIA required is in HTML as required. So yes, use that stuff. That's easy. You basically can't really break stuff with that. But if you have widget roles like menu and tab navigations and stuff like that, remind that they need to be keyboard accessible, and that can be really, really hard. And use the ARIA Best Practices Guide to find out what you really, really have to do, because otherwise you're making it worse instead of better. And that's it. Thank you.
Excellent. So apparently we have a bit of time for some questions. So if anybody of you have a question, we will throw a big cube at you, and hopefully nothing will go wrong, but you can speak into it because there's a microphone at the same time. You can't keep the cube, you have to give it back afterwards. So are there any questions, burning questions? If not, I can bring up things that he finds hard to answer. So be nice to him.
Challenge me.
Anybody has any questions on that? Okay. Yeah, there's one. Yay!
Okay, so I want to ask, if you write perfectly semantic HTML and don't use any wild interactive stuff, do you need any ARIA attributes at all, or is it already okay?
You don't need any ARIA attributes at all.
You know, this thing can be thrown, so people like me don't have to walk there and pick it up again. This was the idea of it. Excellent. Any more questions? We have microphones upstairs, but no food anymore, as far as I heard. So you might as well come down. What are you doing up there? Okay. I just have 2 tips, and I hope you can back me up there. Like at Beyond Tellerrand in Munich, there was a talk by Marcy Sutton that showed how to use React with ARIA and what to do, not to do, and what to do. For example, it had a modal in there that used the ARIA hidden on the body, and she shows how to fix these things in React. And another talk that I keep seeing at these conferences is Leonie Watson about using too much ARIA or using it wrong. So do you think there is a danger of people getting too much knowledge too quickly with ARIA?
I always wanted to speak into that cube. So
you could go into the audience and ask questions, you know that?
Probably I could do that.
Yeah.
So yes, there is basically accessibility is a hot topic right now, and a lot of people really want to make the right thing. And if you Google it, a lot of people say, use this ARIA thing and your problems will go away. And that's not true. You really have to do it properly. So we have a situation where a lot of people are learning accessibility for the first time, and they are learning the wrong things or learning things not completely, and that's a problem.
Is there any good guidelines where people use frameworks that already do the ARIA things right for you? I'm thinking about Hayden Pickering's components, for example.
Right. Yeah, basically the interactive components, thing by Hayden is the only thing I would really recommend, because I don't have a lot of insight about the other frameworks and stuff. What we do have on the w3.org website is tutorials for developers, and they are using like a really tiny layer of ARIA on top of HTML, and that's at w3.org/WAI/tutorials.
Okay. Do you think part of it, why it didn't take on as much as it did, or it did wrongly, was because the specs look so overwhelming? Is there a more user-centered, designy, beautiful, happy medium to learn this, or is it just like, here's the spec and these 400 pages are for you?
So what I've shown is not the spec. It looks like a spec, which is confusing, but well, that's what the ARIA working group decided to do. And it's basically really developer-centric. So you can go in there and it really outlines the individual stuff you have to do, like what you want to, if you want to have a tab navigation, what roles you need to have, how the keyboard interaction should be, and it's pretty clear-cut and really easy to learn language, if you are okay with the sliding.
If there's one thing that you keep seeing of people using ARIA wrong, what would it be, and that people shouldn't do anymore?
It's basically using too much ARIA in general, or not using HTML instead of ARIA, so basically everything I showed. People are just using ARIA instead of really getting, and learning their HTML and using HTML elements. We now with HTML5 we have so many possibilities. We have the details element where you can have your expand collapse section and stuff like that. And we see a lot of people implementing their own stuff and breaking accessibility in the meantime. Those
terrible, terrible people. Thank you, Eric. I hope you have a few questions later on. He'll be around and he'll be happy to answer questions for you and do free consulting for all your companies. No, he doesn't. But it's just, he's around here. Thank you.